It was in 1995 that when I completed my Master's of Laws at the London School of Economics under Judge Rosalind Higgins and Eli Lauterbach. And as part of my requirements, my long essay was on, of course, the South China Sea disputes, a relative assessment of the strength and weaknesses of the respective claimants' claims, under the principle that in territorial disputes involving land territories, the principle, as Lauterbach said, was not which state has a title, but which state has a superior claim to land territory. I note with regret that 20 years later, scholars from all the claimant countries are still talking about the same thing. We have come to a point that we have all memorized the alleged basis of title from all the claimant countries. But I regret to say that so far, there's really been much literature on a possible solution to the dispute. And that is my task this afternoon, because quite frankly, the literature on the West Philippine Sea or the South China Sea has become boring and repetitive. I have to say, though, that because from the academe, having joined the tumultuous world of politics for the past 6 years, that I find it refreshing that at least in this conference, we have had novel suggestions on how to resolve the disputes, highlighting, for instance, existential questions of climate change. And of course, as our colleague from Indonesia has said, concerns about environmental law. But the reality is the dispute is about land territories. And it is still land from which we reckon maritime territories, and any resolution, therefore, has to apply existing principles of public international law, not UNCLOS, on which state has a superior claim to the disputed islands. So, my position is that, in fact, 2 cases decided fairly recently provide us with a general framework by which to arrive at this solution. I refer to the Permanent Court of Arbitration's decision in the case of Eritrea versus Yemen, which was actually a Security Council mandated compulsory arbitration where judges of the ICJ sat as arbitrators. And the recent ITLO's decision on the Philippines versus China, which our Chinese colleagues have flatly rejected, which nonetheless, I submit, provide us with a framework for a possible solution. Let me go first to the fact that, of course, all this conflict about the South China Sea came only as a result of colonialism. For centuries, countries comprising Southeast Asia and China have lived in peace. We have traded, we have invested in each other's territory, and only Japan actually fought a war against Southeast Asia. We have never had any conflict, armed conflict, involving China. And of course, of late, it has been controversial, it has been hot, because Western colonial powers have made it their business to meddle in this part of the world. Why? Maybe because the former unilateral power, the United States, feels threatened with the rise of China now as the second most powerful economy and second most powerful military power in the world. Quickly, because time is running up, basic principles that govern acquisition of land territory. It's based on which state proves a superior claim, not which state has title. We also, therefore, need to go through a comparative analysis of the relative strength and weaknesses of each claimant's claim. Now, some of the important jurisprudence as far as land territory is concerned, Palma's case involving the Philippines. The Americans lost it for us, where of course the principle is discovery alone gives rise only to an inchoate title, which was made perfected through effective occupation. We also apply the law applicable at the time the right is acquired and the law applicable at the time that the right is being enforced. Now, effective occupation, this is the basis of award or deciding which has a meritorious claim, has been defined in the Clipperton case as a taking of possession which consists in acts or series of acts by which the occupying state reduces to its possession the territory in question. Eastern Greenland cases doesn't take much to prove which state has a superior claim. You're talking about remote, desolate, uninhabited islands. Temporal case, estoppel may be a basis for a state to lose its claim to territory. And of course, in Minquera versus Ekrejos, what are relevant are not remote presumptions of possession, but direct, actual, and present evidence of possession. Economic reasons sometimes may be considered. Well, I really don't want to get into this because of lack of time. Let me say that neither of the claimant states can actually present an airtight case. The inherent weakness of the Chinese claim is it's based on historical title. Guess what? Not a single decision involving conflicting claims of territory recognized historical title. The difficulty with the Philippine claim is the Philippine claims that the islands it occupies were in fact res nullius. Guess what? In Eritrea versus Yemen, characterizing islands similarly occupied by Italy during World War II, but abandoned and renounced by Italy to the victorious Allied forces, that arbitration did not say they were res nullius. Instead, the tribunal ruled they were indeterminate. It is still in the hands of the victorious Allied forces to determine which state has a title to the abandoned territory. Now, we also have an inherent weakness in the Chinese claim. Confucian legal system. You see, if you study Confucian legal system, sovereignty is over individuals and not territory. I'm just highlighting this to say that, in effect, all the claimants do not have an airtight claim. But the bottom line really is, if you want to go by effective occupation, the strongest is that of Vietnam. Why? Because their occupation, like in the case of Palmas, was in terms of a state trading monopoly operating in the area. This could have been the strongest title, except that during the Vietnam War, North Vietnam recognized that China had title to the islands disputed between China and Vietnam. Now, of course, the biggest factor in favor of the Philippines were the only archipelagic state that can utilize archipelagic strait-based lines in determining the full extent of our EEZ. And because of this, we're the only country with an indisputable claim to 200 nautical miles of exclusive economic zone. Now, what are the principles of Eritrea versus Yemen, which I think are material here? The first principle is there is no all or nothing rule, meaning just because China claims the entirety of the South China Sea, or the Philippines claims 8 islands, that it is entitled to all the islands that they're claiming. The tribunal ruled that you need to prove a superior claim to each and every individual disputed island. So that's the first important principle that we apply. Second, islands, and when I use islands, I mean high tide elevations, permanently above water. This is where UNCLOS is applicable here. Can only generate 12 nautical miles of territorial sea, and that in order to become an island, you must be able to sustain human habitation. Now, Philippines versus China, what does it say? It says that none of the geographic features is an island. None of them can generate an EEZ. At most, the high tide elevations can only generate pockets of 12 nautical miles of territorial seas. Now, if an island is within a territorial sea of a state, then that becomes part of that coastal state's territory. Geographic features, on the other hand, which are low tide elevations, cannot generate any territorial sea. They form part either of the territorial seas or the EEZ of the coastal state. Now, also in the Philippines versus China, it recognized that 2 of the artificial islands built by China, Mischief and Use, are in the Philippine EEZ, and of course 1 island forms part of the territorial sea of Pag-asa, which of course is also disputed. So what do I say is the solution? Well, this is not the solution. Apply the all or nothing rule. We need to prove title to individual islands. Number 2, since none of the geographic features can generate EEZ, we have reduced the scope of the conflict. If at all, you can only claim pockets of territorial sea. And since only 6 of these features between China and the Philippines are actually high tide elevations, you're only talking of 12 times 6 of territorial seas where you exercise sovereignty and jurisdiction. Certainly, we can resolve the dispute where you have a mammoth body of water and only 36 miles of territorial seas. What else? The Philippines cannot be deprived of an EEZ as an archipelagic state. However, of course, there are islands built according to the tribunal found in the EEZ. But guess what? In the Philippines, we have allowed foreign forces to have bases in our land territory. I see no reason why we cannot come into an agreement to allow the existence of these facilities also in our exclusive economic zone. It's not a perfect solution, but it's the beginning. And let me end by saying that we have an age-old saying in the Philippines, makipag-away ka na sa iyong kamag-anak, huwag lang sa iyong kapitbahay, go pick up a fight with your relatives, but never with your neighbors. Good afternoon.